So they're allowed to feed you, but you're not allowed to feed them. All right. Podcast, episode 125, Tipiṭaka, part 62, in which we will continue with Pācittiya, starting with 46, or XLVI for the ancient Romans. I'd like to welcome our special guest. He's a small monk. He's very into his practice at the present time. He's solar, so. There was another time I wanted to bring him out, but the sun was too bright and he was making too much noise. So it's later in the afternoon now, so we're getting some indirect sunlight. So he's still kind of rocking out, though. I picked him up when we were in Sikkim, Gangtok, the main market area there. There's a little, I think they call it a Chinatown, but it's like a narrow stairway that goes down, and then what seems to be like 4 shops all in one long, narrow area. But then when it comes time to pay, you pay it all in one place, and then at that moment you realize it's one shop, just 4 people kind of overseeing the 4 different areas, make sure people don't steal. So, do you think that it would be disrespectful to name him Shanzan? I don't think so. I mean, why not? Speaking of which, today I received volume 1, and I already had volume 2 of The Journey to the West by Shanzan, for which the movie Shanzan is based. I just pointed you to my own reaction and review to the movie version of those books. So he was, why not? He was a Mahayana Buddhist monk who was master of the Tipiṭaka, which in the next 3 years or so, you and I will also become masters of the Tipiṭaka, if you follow this series diligently, because that's what we're reading right now. But there were copies of different Mahayana sutras and texts that had made their way into China, but they didn't all agree with each other. The translations weren't, consistent, and so Shanzan traveled to Nalanda University. Yes. That is Nalanda University in present day. However, in the movie, they did some special effects, or they decorated it or something to bring it to life as it would have been in 6th or 7th century, Bihar. And though I think they called it something else back then, whatever the name of the king was, they named it after his family at that time. That was how they did it. Sort of like how it was Tong, China at the time. They say, "Oh, you've come all the way from Tong?" The name of the dynasty. All right, so that's fun. So he'll be hanging out here. By the way, for those who celebrate, happy Durga festival, puja. It's the 8th day, so it's the big day today. All right, if this is your first time seeing me, welcome. You might want to click here instead. That will take you to the Tipiṭaka playlist. You can start with episode 1, or rather part 1 of Tipiṭaka. Tipiṭaka, I always do that, rather than starting with episode 62. It is 62, right? I hope so. All right, let's go ahead and start the reading. Hope everybody's doing well. Expiation, Pācittiya, 46. Speaking of Nalanda, we're back in Rajagaha, which, as we all know, is the ancient name of Rajgir, which is where Nalanda is. Anyway, at one time, the Enlightened One, the Lord, was staying at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove at the squirrel's feeding place. Now, at that time, the family who supported the Venerable Upananda, matching, I don't. I've thought about it, but I don't know. All right, anyway, those who supported the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, invited the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, to a meal. And they invited other monks to the meal. I think maybe I should change my name to Edward, the son of the Rebes. Never mind. Now at that time, the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, used to visit families before the meal. Then these monks said to these people, quote, "Sirs, give the meal," end quote. Quote, "Wait, honored sirs, until Master Upananda comes," end quote. A second time these monks, A third time these monks said to these people, quote, "Sirs, give the meal before the right time passes," end quote. A third time they said, quote, "Honored sirs, we made the meal on account of Master Upananda. Wait, honored sirs, until Master Upananda comes," end quote. Then the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, having visited families before the meal, returned during the day. The monks did not eat as much as expected. Those who were modest monks, spread it about, saying, quote, "How can the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, being invited and being, provided, with a meal, call upon families before the meal," end quote, Quote, "Is it true, as is said, that you, Upananda, being invited and being, provided with a meal," provided, that is, with a meal, "called upon families before the meal," end quote. Quote, "It is true, Lord," end quote. The Enlightened One, the Lord, rebuked him, saying, quote, "How can you, foolish man, being invited, before the meal? It is not, foolish man, for pleasing those who are not, yet, pleased, and thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. Whatever monk being invited and being, provided, with a meal, should call upon families before the meal, there is an offense of expiation," end quote. And thus this rule of training for monks came to be laid down by the Lord. Now, at that time, the family who supported the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, sent solid food for the order, saying, quote, "Pointing it out as for Master Upananda, it should be given to the order," end quote. Now, at that time, the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, had entered the village for alms food. Then these people, having gone to the monastery, asked the monks, quote, "Where, honored sirs, is Master Upananda?" End quote. Quote, "Sirs, this Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, has entered the village for alms food." End quote. Quote, "Honored sirs, pointing out this solid food as for Master Upananda, it should be given to the order." End quote. They told this matter to the Lord. What matter? Then the Lord, on this occasion, in this connection, having given reason to talk, addressed the monks, saying, quote, "Well then, monks, having accepted it, put it aside until Upananda comes back." End quote. Then the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, thinking, quote, "It is forbidden by the Lord to call upon families before a meal," end quote, having visited families after a meal, returned during the day. The solid food was left over. Those who were modest monks, spread it about, spread what about? Saying, quote, "How can the Venerable Upananda, the son of the Sakyans, call on families after a meal?" End quote. Just don't call on families, because sometimes you eat, right? So sometimes it's before a meal, sometimes it's after a meal. It's like don't feed the gremlins after midnight, or never mind. Quote, "Is it true, as is said, that you, Upananda, called on families after a meal?" End quote. "It is true, Lord." End quote. The enlightened one, the Lord, rebuked him, saying, quote, How can you, foolish man, call on families after a meal? It is not, foolish man, for pleasing those who are not yet, in parentheses, pleased, and thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. Whatever monk, being invited and being, parentheses, provided, close parentheses, with a meal, should call upon families before a meal or after a meal, there is an offense of expiation. What? End quote. Perhaps it'll make sense later. Mainly like right after? Or right before? I mean, what? And thus this rule of training for monks came to be laid down by the Lord. Now, at that time, scrupulous monks, at the time of giving robes, did not visit families. Little robe material accrued. They told this matter to the Lord. He said, quote, "I allow you, monks, at the time of giving robes to visit families. And thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. Whatever monk, being invited and being, parentheses, provided, close parentheses, with a meal, should call upon families before a meal or after a meal, except at the right time, there is an offense of expiation. In this case, this is the right time. The time of giving robes. This is the right time in this case." End quote. And thus this rule of training for monks came to be laid down by the Lord. Now, at that time, monks were making robes, and they came to be in need of needles and thread and scissors. The monks, being scrupulous, did not visit families. They told this matter to the Lord. He said, quote, "I allow you, monks, at the time of making robes to visit families, and thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. Whatever monk, being invited and being provided, close parentheses, with a meal, should call upon families before a meal or after a meal, except at the right time, there is an offense of expiation. In this case, this is the right time. The time of giving robes, the time of making robes, this is the right time in this case." End quote. And thus this rule of training for monks came to be laid down by the Lord. Sorry, it's contagious. Now at that time, monks became ill and came to be in need of medicines. The monks, being scrupulous, did not visit families. 3 dots. You can put anything you want in those dots. No. Quote, "I allow you, monks, to visit families, having asked, parentheses, for permission, end parentheses, if a monk be there. And thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. Whatever monk, being invited and being, parentheses, provided, close parentheses, with a meal, not having asked, parentheses, for permission, close parentheses, if a monk be there, should call upon families before a meal or after a meal, except at the right time, there is an offense of expiation. In this case, a right time is the time of giving robes, the time of making robes. This is the right time in this case. End quote. Whatever means 3 dots. Monk means 3 dots. Invited means invited to any one meal of the 5 parentheses kinds of close parentheses meals. With a meal means that to which he is invited with a meal. If a monk be there means he is able to enter having asked parentheses for permission, close parentheses. If a monk be not there means he is unable to enter having asked parentheses for permission, end parentheses. Before the meal means invited to it, he is one who has not eaten it. After the meal means invited to it, even parentheses as much as close parentheses becomes eaten with a blade of grass. A family means there are 4 parentheses kinds of close parentheses families. A noble family, a Brahmin family, a merchant family, a low caste family. Should call on families means there is an offensive wrongdoing for entering the precincts of the house of another. If he makes the first foot cross the threshold, there is an offensive wrongdoing. If he makes the second foot cross, there is an offensive expiation. Maybe what it is that you should only be visiting the family who's giving you food. Does that make sense? Maybe? Have I got it right? Any experts out there? So you shouldn't be like, yes, I'll cook. I mean, that kind of, I can kind of see that. Like if Joe invites you over for lunch, and then you're like, hey, Joe, sorry if the food's getting cold. I'm running a little late. I went to visit Sam down the street before I popped by for lunch. Like, that's kind of rude, right? Or if you go to Joe's house and you eat the food, and then you're like, all right, see ya, I'm going to go see Sam. You should just hang out with Joe. Maybe that's what it means. Of course, that's not what was going on in the case where they brought the food and Upananda was out looking for food because he didn't know that they were bringing food, and then he came after he ate. Or he visited families after he ate, which is why it took him so long to come back, even though he wouldn't have been hungry when he got back because he ate, because he didn't know that food was wrong with it. All right. Yes. Except at a right time means setting aside a right time. Time of giving robes means the last month of the rainy season when the katina cloth is not, parentheses, formally, close parentheses, made. The 5 months when the katina cloth is, parentheses, formally, close parentheses, made. So 6 months. There's 6 months where this rule doesn't apply because you might get robes. Is that what that means? Time of making robes means when the robes are being made. If he thinks that he is invited when he is invited, parentheses and, close parentheses, except at the right time, calls on families before the meal or after the meal, I guess it makes sense with the invited part. Not having asked, parentheses, for permission, close parentheses, if a monk be there, there is an offensive expiation. If he is in doubt as to whether he is invited, 3 dots. If he thinks that he is not invited when he is invited, then it must be Mercury retrograde. 3 dots. That's not in the text. Offensive expiation. If he thinks that he is invited when he is not invited, there is an offensive wrongdoing. If he is in doubt as to whether he is not invited, there is an offensive wrongdoing. If he thinks that he is not invited when he is not invited, there is no offense. Also, don't show up there. You're not invited, dude. There is no offense if at the right time he enters, having asked, parentheses, for permission, close parentheses, if a monk be there. If he enters not having asked, parentheses, for permission, and parentheses, if a monk be not there. What? The thing got swallowed up by its own loophole. This rule does not exist. If the way is through the house of another, so in order to get to Joe's house where you've been invited for lunch, you have to walk through Sam's house. Then it would be rude to be like, oh, hey, Sam, I food, I gotta go. Yeah, you can stop and say hi to Sam. Makes sense. All right. That's reasonable. Something reasonable. Sorry. If he is going into a village, if he is going to the nuns' quarters, I don't think you're supposed to go to the nuns' quarters, monk. If he is going to a sleeping place of adherents of other sects, so they're allowed to feed you, but you're not allowed to feed them. All right, I see how it is. If he is going on his way back, if he is going to a house for food, if there are accidents, if he is mad, if he is the first wrongdoer, the sixth, meaning the 46th. I think the whole thing is mad, personally. No, it makes sense. It makes sense, I think. All right, Expiation, Pācittiya, 47, or XLVII. At one time, the enlightened one, the Lord, was staying among the Sakyans in Kapilavatthu at the Banyan monastery. Now remember Banyan, not Bunyan. If you've got that visual, get it out of there. Don't think about that. Now, at the time, Mahanama, the Sakyan, had abundant medicine. Ooh, is that code? I want to hang out with Mahanama. Then Mahanama, the Sakyan, approached the Lord, and having greeted the Lord, he sat down at a respectful distance. I hear it's legal in Thailand now. As he was sitting down at a respectful distance, Mahanama, the Sakyan, spoke thus to the Lord, quote, I want, Lord, to invite the order, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, medicine for 4 months. End quote. Quote, very good, Mahanama. Well then, you, Mahanama, invite the order, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, medicine for 4 months. End quote. The monks, being scrupulous, did not consent. They told this matter to the Lord. He said, quote, I allow you, monks, to accept an invitation, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, a requisite for 4 months. End quote. Then monks, how are they going to remember the rules if they're... Then monks asked Mahanama, the Sakyan, for a little medicine. A little bit. Parentheses, although, close parentheses, Mahanama the Sakyan had abundant medicine as before. Why did Miss Horner put the word although there? It would have made more sense without it. It makes no sense with it. A second time did Mahanama the Sakyan approach the Lord, spoke thus to the Lord, quote, I want, Lord, to... they asked for little when he had a lot. They could have been like, hey, man, give me lots of medicine. Oh. But they were like, just a little, please. Yes. Quote, I want, Lord, to invite the order, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, medicine for an additional 4 months. What? Okay. Close quote, end quote, as they say in English. Quote, very good, Mahanama. Well, then you, Mahanama, invite the order, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, medicine for an additional 4 months. End quote. The monks, being scrupulous, did not consent. They told this matter to the Lord. He said, quote, I allow you, monks, to accept a renewed invitation. End quote. I have to renew your prescription. Oh, they don't do that anymore. Never mind. Then monks asked Mahanama the Sakyan for just a little medicine. Parentheses, although, close parentheses, Mahanama the Sakyan had abundant medicine as before. Right, now although makes sense. I take it back. Spirit of Miss Horner. A third time did Mahanama the Sakyan approach the Lord. Spoke thus to the Lord. Quote, I want, Lord, to invite the order, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, medicine for life. End quote. Quote, very good, Mahanama. Well then, you, Mahanama, invite the order, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, medicine for life. End quote. Ooh, a bit of a breeze. Some weather happening. Just a few small clouds. There is some rain in the forecast, but it's not for a few more days. All right. The monks, being scrupulous, did not consent. They told this matter to the Lord. He said, quote, I allow you monks to accept a permanent invitation. End quote. Now, at that time, the group of 6 monks, little too much medicine. Hey, 6 monks. That's better. Pay attention. We're talking about you. A group of 6 monks had become improperly dressed. It's all the medicine. Improperly clothed, not decently attired. Are these 3 different ways of saying the same thing in Pali, or did they repeat? Mahanama the Sakyan became a speaker. Wow, that's some good medicine. One time my friend became a microphone. Anyway, quote, why are you, honored sirs, improperly dressed, improperly clothed, not decently attired? On going forth, should not one become properly dressed, properly clothed, decently attired? End quote. The group of 6 monks grumbled at Mahanama the Sakyan. Then it occurred to the group of 6 monks, quote, now in what way could we bring shame to Mahanama the Sakyan? End quote. Then it occurred to the group of 6 monks, quote, the order is invited by Mahanama the Sakyan, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, medicine. Come, your reverence, let us ask Mahanama the Sakyan for ghee. Oh, okay. End quote. Then the group of 6 monks approached Mahanama the Sakyan, and having approached, they spoke thus to Mahanama the Sakyan. Quote, sir, we want a dona measure of ghee. End quote. The footnote says CBDI 104N2. If you're going to go to that much trouble, why don't you just tell me what a dona is, you donut? Sorry. Quote, honored sirs, wait this day, parentheses, only, close parentheses, CF Vin 3 220 F equals above P64. That's what the footnote says. Scholarly stuff. People are going to the cattle pen to get ghee. You may fetch it in the morning. End quote. A second time, 3 dots. A third time did the group of 6 monks speak thus, 3 dots. Quote, 3 dots in the morning. End quote. Quote, do you, sir, not give what you invited, parentheses, us to accept, close parentheses, because you do not desire to give what you invited, parentheses, us to accept, close parentheses, question mark, end quote? Then Mahanama the Sakyan looked down upon, criticized, spread it about, saying, quote, how can these reverend sirs, being told, quote, within quotes, wait this day, parentheses, only, end parentheses, honored sirs, end quote, within quotes, not wait, end quote. Monks heard Mahanama the Sakyan as he 3 dots spread it about. Those who were modest monks, 3 dots spread it about, saying, quote, how can this group of 6 monks, being told by Mahanama the Sakyan, quote within quote, wait this day, parentheses, only, close parentheses, honored sirs, end quote within quotes, not wait, end quote, 3 dots, quote, is it true, as is said, that you, monks, being told, 3 dots, did not wait, end quote? Quote, it is true, Lord, end quote. The enlightened one, the Lord, rebuked them, saying, quote, how can you, foolish men, being told by Mahanama the Sakyan, 3 dots, not wait? It is not, foolish men, for pleasing those who are not, parentheses, yet, close parentheses, pleased, 3 dots. And thus, monks, this rule of training should be set forth. When a monk is not ill, an invitation, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, a requisite, for 4 months may be accepted, unless there be a renewed invitation, unless there be a permanent invitation. If one should accept for longer than that, there is an offense of expiation. Wow, that was surprising that was the rule that was laid down. End quote. When a monk is not ill, an invitation, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, a requisite for 4 months may be accepted means an invitation, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, a requisite may be accepted by one who is ill. And a renewed invitation may be accepted means if he thinks, quote within quotes, when I become ill, then I will ask, end quote within quotes. And a permanent invitation may be accepted means if he thinks, quote within quotes, when I become ill, then I will ask, end quote within quotes. Oh, unless there be a renewed invitation, unless there be a permanent invitation. If one should accept for longer than that, there is an offense of expiation. What is longer than a permanent invitation? What is the rule? These are questions on my mind. Yes. If one should accept for longer than that means there is an invitation limited to medicines, not limited to nights. There is an invitation limited to nights, not limited to medicines. There is an invitation limited to medicines and limited to nights. There is an invitation neither limited to medicines nor limited to nights. Limited to medicines means if he says, quote, I invite, parentheses, them to accept, close parentheses, just these medicines, end quote, medicines come to be taken up. Limited to nights means if he says, quote, I invite, parentheses, them to accept, close parentheses, on just these nights, end quotes, nights come to be taken up. Limited to medicines and limited to nights means if he says, quote, I invite, parentheses, them to accept, close parentheses, just these medicines on just these nights, end quote, medicines come to be taken up and nights come to be taken up. Neither limited to medicines nor limited to nights means there come to be medicines that are not taken up and there come to be nights that are not taken up. In, quote, limited to medicines, end quote, if, setting aside those medicines which he came to be invited, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, he asks for other medicines, there is an offense of expiation. In, quote, limited to nights, end quote, if, setting aside those nights for which he came to be invited, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, he asks for other nights, there is an offense of expiation. In, quote, limited to medicines and limited to nights, end quote, if setting aside those medicines which he came to be invited, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, if setting aside those nights for which he came to be invited, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, he asks for other medicines for other nights, there is an offense of expiation. In, quote, neither limited to medicines nor limited to nights, end quote, there is no offense. I still don't know what the rule is. If he asks, I guess maybe it's explaining. Like if you say, hey, I've got some weed for you, and you say, may I have some speed, then that's expiation, right? Just if those are medicine. If he asks for medicine that is not to be used as medicine, there is an offense of expiation. If he asks for one medicine that may be used as a different medicine, there is an offense of expiation. If he thinks that it is for longer than that when it is for longer than that, parentheses, and close parentheses, ask for a medicine, there is an offense of expiation. If he is in doubt as to whether it is for longer than that, 3 dots, probably expiation. If he thinks that it is not for longer than that, when it is for longer than that, 3 dots, offense of expiation. If he thinks that it is for longer than that, when it is not for longer than that, there's an offense of wrongdoing. If he is in doubt as to whether it is not for longer than that, there is an offense of wrongdoing. If he thinks that it is not for longer than that, when it is not for longer than that, there is no offense. Are you guys following this? If you do, if you are, there's a place where you can comment and put it in like modern English or just like simplified, like what is the rule? If he thinks that it is for not longer than that, when it is for not longer than that, then there is no offense. If he does not think that what is for longer than what, and permanent, never mind. There is no offense, maybe I'm just dense today. There is no offense if he asks for those medicines which he came to be invited, parentheses, to accept, all right, end parentheses. If he asks for those nights for which he came to be invited, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, I think I get it. If he asks explaining, quote within quotes, of those medicines which we were invited by you, parentheses, to accept, close parentheses, we need this and that medicine. So is ghee not included in the abundant medicines? And quote within quotes, if he asks explaining, quote within quotes, those nights for which we were invited by you have passed and we need medicine, end quote within quotes. If they belong to relations, if they are invited, if it is for the sake of another, if it is by means of his own property, if he is mad, if he is the first wrongdoer. The seventh, meaning the 47th. Well, you guys have been naughty today. Not you. I'm talking to them, of course. So, off with you. You go over there. All right. A special thanks to Confusion, the state of Confusion, for gracing me with your presence in this reading today. And special thanks to you for going on this ride with me through thick and thin, longer than invited and shorter than invited, and on nights not permanently invited to share, parentheses. All right, I guess I'll go ahead and close now, and I look forward to next time. And then we'll finish pretty soon, probably. Maybe the next episode we'll finish this decade, this decade, this series of 10 rules, and then find out what the key words were. And maybe the next 10 will be more interesting. Okay. If you have any questions, please comment below. And, all right. Do you have any comments as well? To the north and to the south, to the east and to the west, to the spirits of light among us and to the spirits below, we send out our reverent love and compassion. May all beings be happy. May all beings be serene. May all beings be in peace. Until next time.